Good morning, friends and family. Good morning, church. My name is Sam Anderson. If we haven't met yet, muy buenos días a todos. Me llamo Samuel. And along with my wife, Carrie, not only do we serve a part of staff here at Valley Christian, but we also lead our youth and family ministry, a ministry centered around passing on a sincere faith to the younger generations, helping them to both learn and become convinced of the gospel of Jesus. Thank you so much for tuning in for our online service. If you're joining in for the first time, we're actually going through our year-long focus of being unified. And not only just being unified, but unified in different aspects. And we just finished off this month or August of being unified in discipleship. Before we move on to our next, kind of focus in being unified, I want to revisit the topic of discipleship. How has it gone for you in the month of August? Have you made any decisions about growing in your discipleship? We talked about what it meant to be totally committed to Jesus's teachings, his example, and his mission. If you haven't made any decisions, it's still not too late to do so. You could still focus in September on being unified in discipleship. I would hate for us to go through those passages about our total commitment to Jesus and just move on and just forget about it and just move on to a different topic. It shouldn't be like that. How do you plan on still growing in your discipleship in the month of September? Now, another focus that we're encouraging for this month of September is being unified in prayer. When you think of the word prayer, what does that word mean to you? Well, as far as I can tell in scripture, as you look at different examples of people praying, it seems to be a way to communicate with God, a way to communicate your feelings, your thoughts, feelings you have on a situation. Sometimes you might communicate with God on behalf of another person, but it does seem to carry the spirit of you are having a conversation with God. And we see this picture being portrayed with Moses in Exodus 33. In verse 12, he begins his prayer, and Moses said to the Lord. Verse 14, the Lord replied. Verse 15, the Lord said to him. Verse 17, and the Lord said to Moses. Verse 18, then Moses said. Verse 19, and the Lord said. And then verse 21, then the Lord said. And we see this back and forth, like you would normally see in a typical conversation. I will say, as helpful of an example this is when it comes to having a conversation with God, sharing our thoughts, listening to God. This interaction doesn't seem to be the norm when it comes to hearing God's actual voice. If you look at different examples of people praying, not everyone heard God's actual voice as they were praying to him. And this might be an experience that you have today, that you might be praying on your way to work, at the end of your night, when you're going to sleep, when you wake up, and yet you don't hear God's actual voice in response to the things you're praying. But nevertheless, it is still you having a conversation with God in the sense of you are talking, communicating with him, and he is listening, giving you his attention. Now, on the topic of conversation, I want to ask you, would you agree that conversation can bring benefit to a relationship? Think about that. Think about your relationships, friends, family, coworkers. Can conversation bring benefit to a relationship? If you were to ask me, I would say yeah, in general. When it comes to the closeness or the trust that can be built in result of a good conversation, I would say yeah. Now, carry on and keep that thought in mind. Another follow-up question would be, well, is every kind of conversation automatically beneficial? Is every kind of conversation automatically beneficial? Again, I don't know where you stand as you think about the examples in your life. If you were to ask me again, I would say no, not every conversation is automatically beneficial. There's been people that I've talked to a lot to resolve conflict. And because of the attitudes that we both had and the mindset and just the energy that we were bringing, those conversations didn't result in the benefits that I just described, into the relationship that I had with that person. So no, not every kind of conversation, at least for me, has been beneficial. Why do I share that? Because I do think when it comes to relationships and relationships growing and trust being established and there being a sense of intimacy between the two people, whether emotionally or relationally, I do think the quality of the conversations matter as well as the quantity of conversation matters. Why do I say that? Well, think about the conversation that you have over and over. But again, the quality isn't there. The attitude of relationship isn't there. There's feelings like the quality isn't there, but you're talking a lot. That doesn't mean that those conversations are all going to be beneficial to your relationship. And then on the flip side, maybe the quality is there, but you hardly talk. Think of a marriage that they have great conversations, but they talk once a month. Are those conversations going to really be beneficial to their marriage? They probably need to talk more. So I think to that standpoint, to that perspective, quality, quantity, they both matter. And I think it's very similar when in our relationship with God. Prayer can bring benefit to your relationship with God. You practicing conversation and talking with God can bring benefit. But quality matters, and so does quantity. Well, why do I share that? Well, in Matthew 6, Jesus is teaching on prayer. Verses 5-7, he says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. And we see Jesus not just encouraging them to pray, but really teaching them that the way you pray matters. The way the religious leaders pray isn't good. They pray with the motivation of wanting to be seen by others and get public attention. Like praying in that way is not good. Then he says, don't pray in the way of the pagans. They just think by their many words, it's going to improve their relationship with God. It's like, no, there needs to be more to it. There needs to be an intimacy. There needs to be a relational attitude that you have. It's like you're going behind a closed door and just praying in privacy with your Father. So we see Jesus teaching. It's not just about praying, but how you pray. The quality of your conversation with God matters. What about the quantity? Why does that have to matter when it comes to our relationship with God? You might have a friend where you feel like they live out of state, you hardly talk to, but when you do talk, it's like you never missed a day in your relationship. You still feel as close as ever. You guys are both busy, families, work, but when you talk, it's great. I do want to discourage that type of mentality when it comes to God, specifically because in those relationships that you could think of, you hardly talk, but when you do talk, you guys are still close. I want to ask you, is there someone actively in that friendship of yours trying to create separation and division and spur doubt, either in your mind or in your friend's mind? Odds are, no, it's just a neutral relationship. You guys hardly talk, but you're still close. But no one isn't actively trying to divide you two. Why do I bring that up? Because I do think that is the case with God. It's not like, oh, let's talk to God every once in a while and everything. Well, if we have that mentality, we must also recognize that there's actually someone still trying to actively divide us, create separation. And I'm talking about Satan and the enemies of God. In Ephesians 6, verse 12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Paul says, hey, arm yourself with the armor of God. Like there's these spiritual dark forces that are against you. In the Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, we see this picture of this dragon, waging war against this woman. It's just this big imagery or this analogy connecting with Satan being against Jesus and his people. But we see in this symbolic way, 17, it says, then the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. This picture of Eve and her seed of Jesus and those that come from Jesus and his people. Then it says, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. So in both these passages, we see this picture of there are spiritual forces that are against the people of God. Dark, evil forces. We can't afford just to talk to God every once in a while and just expect to still be close when we have these active forces trying to create separation, trying to create division in our relationship with him. So to that extent, I say both quality and quantity matters in the conversations we have with God. Throughout this month of September, the focus is being unified and being intentional in our conversations with God, pursuing both depth and consistency in prayer. We just finished last month of being united in discipleship. Why not keep the ball rolling and give our attention to the example of Jesus? So as we follow Jesus, we're committed to his teachings, example, and his mission. Why not look to the example of Jesus when it came to how he prayed? What did he pray about? What was his lifestyle of prayer? I will say, at least from what I see in scripture, Jesus had both the quantity and the quality of conversation with God. Let's start with the quantity. Luke 5, verse 16. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. This was a rhythm of Jesus. He often found solitude to have a conversation with God. Sometimes it was in the morning, as we see in Mark 1:35, very early in the morning while it was still dark. Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. And sometimes it was at nighttime. Luke 6:12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. You see, whether it was throughout the day, in the morning, at night, Jesus often slipped away to have a conversation with his Father. As I paint this picture of Jesus's life, I don't know if you're like me, but you might feel a little overwhelmed and disconnected from this, in the sense of, that's great, Jesus did it, but I have a lot going on. Like when I'm trying to slip away, let me tell you, the last thing is prayer. I'm just trying to get some alone time. Like I have the pressures of work. I have all the appointments that I have. Sometimes it's just emotionally draining to be at work based on the kind of work that I have. Sometimes it's physically draining based on the kind of work that I have. But work is hard alone. 40 hours a week, sometimes up to 60. And in some cases, maybe you're a full-time student or a part-time student. You have studying, you have preparing for tests. That can be emotionally challenging and draining. And then in some cases, you have a family of your own. You have kids. You could be a stay-at-home mom or dad, and that is enough to have you feel emotionally and physically drained. And we talk about Jesus slipping away to prayer. We just want to slip away to some guilty pleasures. Find our favorite snacks, get our favorite TV show, our favorite Netflix. I want to be on my phone, catch up on social media, like some Instagram posts. I want to, or maybe it's none of those things. It's like, forget about I just want to sleep. I want to slip away to my bedroom and go to sleep. That's great, Jesus. But this is what I'm going through and what I feel like I can handle with my lifestyle. I do think those feelings and those different scenarios are valid. And the struggle is real. It is exhausting to do life at times, especially with all the responsibilities we have in this day and age. But I do want to encourage you with a certain truth about Jesus, especially if you are devoted to being like him. And that truth is, Jesus was also very tired and busy at times. Think about that. Internalize it. Reflect on that. Jesus was also very tired and very busy at times. We see in passages like John 4:4-6, he's traveling through Samaria. He comes to this particular city, and it says towards the end, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. In Israel and where Jesus lived, it got very, very hot. They didn't have cars. It didn't seem like Jesus had a horse. He walked. He walked from city to city. He would journey up hills, down mountains, dirt roads. It would be physically exhausting to travel as much as he had traveled. And on top of that, it was under the pressure of the sun. And him being human, he got tired throughout the time of his life, especially during his ministry. We also know that he was very busy at times. Mark chapter 1 gives us a glimpse in one day in Jesus' ministry. Verse 16, he's walking beside the Sea of Galilee. This is where he finds his first disciples. Verse 19, he's still walking and he goes a little further and he finds more disciples. Verse 21, then he went to Capernaum. This is a different city. Again, he has to walk there. He is traveling. Verse 23, he makes his way into a synagogue where there's a man with an impure spirit. He cast out the spirit in the synagogue. He's praying. He's exhausting himself of energy, teaching, casting out demons. Verse 29, as soon as they left the synagogue, I believe they go to Simon Peter's mother-in-law's house, and then he heals his mother-in-law. So he's giving of himself. He's traveling. He's teaching. He's giving off. He's spending energy. But then, verse 32 to 35, picture this. That evening after sunset, it's the same day. That evening, after all that traveling, teaching, casting out the impure spirit, healing Peter's mother-in-law, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons. But he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning. Now, I don't know if this was the following day, but we can reason that it probably was the following day, where very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. You see, Jesus got tired often, and he also was very busy, but he still prioritized conversation with God. He conversed with God often. I want to encourage you to follow the example of Jesus. There's some practicals that might help you is that I encourage you to know your schedule very well. And you might already know your schedule very well, but if you don't, know your schedule. When do you have things planned? When do you have breaks in your schedule? Even if it's a break of 15 minutes, I would be very diligent in knowing what you have planned throughout a week. So you can be very intentional about when you could slip away, about when you need to wake up to start your day to pray so that you can be off to your next appointment, or what time you're going to be going to sleep so you know how much time you have at the end of the day. Just know your schedule very well and also learn to say no. You don't have to say yes to every appointment. Have boundaries with your schedule throughout the week. Maybe in some cases, you need to make the time to slip away to God and have a conversation with him. And it might take you saying no to certain appointments, rescheduling certain appointments, or counseling certain appointments. I'm not saying be irresponsible, but I also am saying be very, not necessarily, but just have healthy boundaries with your activities throughout the week as you make time specifically for prayer. Lastly, I would say, as you think about connection that you have with a friend, sometimes you text and it's just a quick text throughout the day. And sometimes it's a longer phone call, or you meet up to have coffee and it's a longer conversation. I would think of conversating with God in a similar sense. Sometimes it might be just a quick prayer in your head on your way to work or on your lunch break, on your way to the snack room. And it's a quick little conversation of talking to God about what you feel, what you're thinking. And then there's some cases where it might be longer, more of a sit down, more of you are slipping away to spend time for 30 minutes, an hour, having a conversation with God. But let's be intentional about really focusing and having the quantity of conversation with God. Now let's talk about quality. It's not enough just to talk to God a lot and expect it to bring benefit. But what is the quality of those conversations? Again, let's look at the example of Jesus. John 17:1. I will encourage you to read the whole chapter of 17. Jesus is praying about himself and God. He's praying about his disciples and God. He's praying about the world and the people that his disciples are going to impact. It's just very dynamic. He's talking about different topics. So just read that over on your own time. We're not going to go through in the detail of everything he prayed about, but just certain aspects of his prayer. Verse 1, it says, after Jesus said this, he looked toward heaven and prayed, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. This might not be this big of a detail, but I do think is significant. Jesus, at the beginning of this prayer, he looks toward heaven and he begins his conversation. Have you ever thought that body language matters in a conversation? It doesn't always make or break the conversation. Like, you don't need to have great body language just to be able to listen. No, you can have very poor body language, but still be listening to someone as they're talking and still be able to communicate. But body language can help in a conversation, especially as that conversation is for building that relationship. And I would say the same thing is with God. Sometimes our posture, how we position our body, can be very helpful as we're having a conversation with God. Jesus, he looks up towards heaven. Imagine being outside. It's a clear, or maybe it's in the middle of the day, it's a clear skies, and you're looking up and you see the clouds. And as you're looking up at the clouds, you begin to have a conversation with your Father in heaven. Or maybe it's at nighttime where there's stars that are out. And again, instead of just closing your eyes, maybe, or instead of just looking forward, you look up and you look at the stars above you, and then you start to have a conversation with God. You see, sometimes our body language can help us direct our attention to God in a better way. Jesus, he's looking up to heaven. He's giving God his attention. And on top of that, he's addressing God as his Father. Throughout his prayers, 6 times at least, he refers to God as his Father. You see, he had this relational attitude. So not only was he positioning his body, looking up towards heaven, but he had this relational attitude. He was talking with his Father. Jesus directs his focus towards God, approaching him with this heart of relationship. I want to ask you a question. What will it take for God to have your undivided attention when you pray? Are you at a place where you need to focus maybe more on your body language? Maybe you need to kneel down to God as you're praying to him with your face to the ground. Maybe you need to close your eyes and cross your hands maybe when you pray. I don't know if that might help you. Or maybe you need to be outside and look up and and tilt your head to God as you pray to him. What is it going to take for him to get your undivided attention? Maybe it's none of those things. Maybe it's just you simply slipping away to find a private place to pray to God. Away from the TV, away from other people, kids, friends. You just need to find a place of solitary to give God your undivided attention. What will it take for him to have your attention in this way? Another aspect of Jesus's prayer that I do think speaks towards the quality of his prayer is that he's not just speaking to his Father, but he's specific in addressing his Father in certain ways. For example, in verse 3, he says he refers to his Father as the only true God. Then in verse 11, he refers to his Father as the Holy Father. And then verse 25, he specifically addresses God as his righteous Father. So it's the only true God, Holy Father, righteous Father. Jesus had such a great awareness of who his Father was. He wasn't just thinking, oh yeah, I'm just talking to my dad, but he was aware. My Father is the only true God. My Father is holy. My Father is righteous. Imagine how much an awareness of God can impact how we talk to him. Could you imagine that the more we are aware of who God is, it might change how we talk to God, like the attitude we bring, the tone of voice we bring to God, but also what we say to God, just by simply having an awareness of who he is. Imagine every time you came to God, you were aware that he is holy, that he is distinct from anything, any person, that he's majestic, that he is beautiful and valuable and worthy, that he's jealous, that he deserves absolute worship, that he's incomprehensible, that he's beyond any human comprehension, that he's self-existent, he's without cause, he's the great cause of everything, that he's self-sufficient, he is without need, although we have tons of needs, that he's immutable, he does not change in character or in value. He'll forever be good. He'll forever be loving. that he's infinite, he is without limits and without need for growth. He's perfect, that he's sovereign, he possesses every necessary ability for absolute authority, that he's omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. His presence fills the universe. He is able to do all that he pleases, and his knowledge is totally true and accurate. What if we brought into our conversations with God knowing that he's wise? He knows which course of action is best. He's eternal. He is not limited by time. He will forever exist. That he is good, that he is love, and he's committed to being self-giving for our well-being. That he is merciful. He withholds what is deserved, even if it's punishment. That he's patient. He prolongs his anger. He's gracious. He gives what is undeserved. He's forgiving. He releases us from our faults. He's just. He shows no favoritism. And he's righteous. He always chooses what is right. He's truthful. His actions and words always agree. There's no hypocrisy in God. That he's faithful. He is always loyal to his word. That he's truth. He defines and shapes what is real. He is wrathful. He hates all evil. Question: what if our prayers were filled with a deep awareness of who God really is? How much would it change the quality of our conversation with him? As we come to a close, I want you to think about, how can you focus more on the quality of your conversations with God? What is it going to take for you to have, a complete focus in talking to God, meaning he has your undivided attention? Do you need to slip away to private places more often and separate yourself from the noise and the busyness of our homes? Get away from the computer and the TV and be alone with God? Maybe you need to position your body in a way that helps you focus better by kneeling down to God with your face to the ground, or maybe closing your eyes and crossing your hands, or bowing your head, or maybe just being outside and lifting up your head to God. What is it going to take for you to grow in your awareness of who it is you're speaking to? And this is huge, because it is going to affect what you pray about and how you talk to God. It might even shapen up your tone of voice in some cases. I think about my daughters, and sometimes they say things, well, not recently, but when they were younger, they would say something in a way where it's like, did you forget who you're talking to? Like, I'm dad. You don't talk to me like that. So sometimes them remembering who I am changes how they speak to me. And the same thing is with God. How do we need to grow in our awareness? I want to encourage you to be deep in scripture, studying who God is. Looking at him in the Old Testament. Who is God? See how he's wise. See how he's omniscient. See how he's sovereign and eternal and good and just and wrathful and majestic and glorious. We need to study who God is so we can grow in our awareness in our prayers. As we come to a close again, prayer, conversation with God can bring benefit, but we must give attention to both the quality and quantity of our conversations. And with that, the whole focus was looking at Jesus. Look at how often he prayed, morning, night, throughout the day, but also looking at the quality of his prayer, using John 17 as an example. In that particular chapter, he lifts his head up to heaven. He addresses God as Father, but not just Father, Holy Father, righteous Father. You could see the quality in Jesus's prayer. So as we go throughout our week, as we go throughout the month, let's really have this heart of being united in prayer, pursuing both a depth, but also a consistency in our conversations with God. Thank you so much for tuning in for our online service. Please have a great rest of your Sunday and a great week. Bye.
Thank you again for joining us online. We are so glad that you did. We'd like to invite you to continue your experience by joining a discussion and fellowship. All you have to do if you would like to join is click on the link in the description below the video. We hope that you really enjoy that. If you are not watching it live, we would like to invite you to get more information, to ask a question, or to maybe even join a Bible study by clicking on the link in the description below the video. Feel free to explore and get more information. But whatever you do, have a great week. God bless. Thank you for coming.